and folks, especially folks that have kids and they're all back to school. So I want to ask, what was your favorite memory this summer? And I'll start off with you, Pete, and then you can popcorn it over to Bridget.
Ooh, favorite memory of the summer. I think I'm gonna go for two to cheat. I think one was son's birthday is on the 4th of July, which is always exciting every year, and so we took him to Mammoth in kind of Central California ski hill. Not to go skiing in the middle of the summer, but to like go and go fishing and boating and look at fireworks, which are he's starting to believe are not just for him, which is kind of like the lie we've been telling him. So there's that, and then also I've been able to do like a bunch of really cool like fun business travel and meet like hang out with a bunch of Atrium customers and what have you over the last bit. What about you, Bridge? What was your highlight of the summer?
Gosh, I mean, I didn't realize fireworks weren't just for me, so this is a lot for me right now, Pete, to process. But my favorite memory from the summer, I think the thing that comes to mind is going to Boise, Idaho, to visit my boyfriend's family, and then driving up to Stanley, Idaho. If anybody knows where that is, maybe we got some people from Stanley right now. I
Shout
doubt it
out from
though. There's like
Stanley.
60 people there.
Shout out to Stan.
Um,
Oh, okay.
yeah, maybe there's a big startup community there. I'm not sure. But yeah, it was just gorgeous, beautiful, fun to be in the mountains. Loved it.
Nice.
Love it. What
Well,
about you,
awesome.
Yeah.
Angelica?
Yeah, a big highlight of mine was moving to Vancouver. So, also being in the mountains up north in Canada. So, shout out if anyone is in Vancouver, Canada. But that was a huge highlight for me.
I love it.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Fabulous.
So, let's dive right in. I'm sure everyone is super excited. Today, we're going to talk about go coach or go home, knock your revenue out of the park. Now, we don't have Ted Lasso or Zach Galifianakis on this call, but we do have two
Dope.
amazing Atrium guests that I'm super excited to introduce later on in this call. But first, let's talk about modern sales pros. Hi, everyone. I'm Angelica. I'm one of the community event managers at Modern Sales Pros. And for those who are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest and highest quality for those in sales management, sales leadership, sales and revenue operation, and sales enablement, aka our Modern Sales Pros. Our mission is to create an environment for our members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own and help them to see around corners they may not know about. We do this through live sessions like the one you're about to experience today, and our online forum and our quarterly summits, which I'll talk a little bit more in the next few slides. And we're also getting back to in person events. We actually have our Dreamforce event happening on September 20th. It's going to be amazing. I know Bridget and Pete are going to be there. And if you're in the Bay Area, definitely come by and swing by. I'll actually drop the link here in the chat. If you know anyone who's in the Bay Area or if you're in the Bay Area, please join. It's going to be so, so good. So if you're not already part of the MSP, join our squad. You'll be invited to join after this event. Now, speaking of the summit,
Ooh.
I'm so excited about the summit happening next month. If you love this content, which I'll know you will, join us for 3 days at our Revenue Excellence Summit happening October 11th through the 13th. We pulled together 24 events of amazing content and speakers. You'll hear from CEO of Zoom Info, Gainsight, Cowboy Ventures, and Winning by Design, and as well as sales leaders at Lattice, Pendo, Outreach, Atrium, and more. Here's the link to sign up. You won't want to miss the event of the year and get your free pass right here.
Exciting.
Now, I'm super excited enough about MSP. I'm going to pass it off to Pete to say a few words about our sponsor, Atrium.
Yeah, thanks, Angelica. I'm really excited about the summit. The speakers are just absolutely bananas. Hey, folks. Atrium is sponsoring this modern sales event. For folks who may not be familiar with Atrium, Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that helps sales managers, leaders, and reps use metrics to improve performance. It's pretty much like the upshot. And the way that Atrium does that is by quickly, it takes 5 minutes to set up, quickly connect it to your Salesforce CRM, and in a series of minutes, you've got a world-class analytics harness that will tell you performance of your reps across dozens and dozens of KPIs and let you know exactly where the areas are for improvement, who's kicking butt and why, and who needs help and where. So that's a little bit on Atrium there, but we'll talk more about data-driven coaching here in short order after the housekeeping.
Thanks, Pete. Now, diving into the housekeeping, first and foremost, this panel is being recorded. So if you have a colleague that was unable to watch it live, rest assured you'll have the key takeaways and recording after this event. And please use the Q&A chat function at the right-hand corner. So please leverage the chat and ask all your questions. Pete and Bridget will be sure to get them towards the end of the event. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Pete to do introductions and then also Bridget to do her introductions. And I'll come back at the end for the closing remarks. Pete, take it away.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you, Angelica. I appreciate it. I think I'm actually going to pop over here onto my own screen here. We're going to do like the little hall of mirrors here really quickly. I'm mobile right now, traveling, so I only have one monitor, unfortunately. So we're going to do our little hall of mirrors here. Whoa, infinite. And then whoa. All right. Cool. So introductions. I'm super pumped to have Bridget here today. Really quick on me. I'm Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the co-founders at Atrium, where I also lead our go-to-market function. And so you guys heard about Atrium already. Prior to Atrium, I started a software company called TalentBin that was acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014. That's really kind of where I got into kind of like the modern sales world, because I went from being a business generalist founder to our first seller, sales manager, sales leader at TalentBin, about a 20-person sales organization. We were acquired by Monster in 2014. And then at Monster, I was responsible for new product sales for like 1,000-person sales organization. It was like a little bit of a change of pace, but we kind of like have kind of seen it all there. Also wrote a book on sales for on startup sales called Founding Sales. Then of course started Modern Sales Pro. So that's a little bit about me. I would love for my illustrious colleague Bridget Seacard to introduce herself. Bridge.
Thanks, Pete. I'm super pumped to be here. So thank you, Angelica and Pete, and for everybody who's here. I am Bridget. I manage the customer experience team at Atrium and have been doing so for the past year, which is crazy. But before that, I started my career in sales operations. So I was helping startups, high growth startups, like I'm sure a lot of other people on this call are a part of, run the behind the scenes of their sales teams, and actually pivoted into customer success at Atrium 2.5 years ago. So I've been with Atrium since February 2020. What a time to be alive. Started as one of their first CSMs. If anybody remembers that. Started as one of the first CSMs here, and now lead a team of 15 people who are in charge of our support functions, our CS functions, and implementation functions. And as you know, part of that, wear a lot of hats. Still learning so much about sales and CS operations, and getting to flex that muscle as well. So yeah, super excited to be here. Love the MSP community. Love talking about coaching. It's something we talk about with our customers all the time, and I've learned a lot about it firsthand in the past year, and I'm excited to kind of share some stories, do some color commentating here, and yeah, so take it away, Pete.
Killer. Yeah, you guys are in for a treat because, Bridget not only like many of our customer success folks has a background in sales operations and in sales strategy, but also has worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Atrium customers, which is kind of like, I mean, it's like the best of all worlds. Like we took a bunch of customers out to dinner in Seattle here last night, and I was talking about how much fun it is that we get to sell to sales leaders and sales development leaders and what have you, because like they're very nice people to hang out with and have like drinks and beers and and dinner with. But also one of the things that we get to do is we get to learn from our customers so much in the context of helping them use Atrium to improve the performance of their teams. And so anyway, like our customer success function, of course, is like the like the centralization of that brain trust. And Bridget is the representative here today. So that's awesome. Before we kind of jump into the slides here, a couple of coaching resources we'd love to offer folks here. These are some of my favorite kind of books on sales coaching right now. This is kind of like the yin and the yang of modern coaching, kind of like the best available coaching resources out there. 5 Secrets of a Sales Coach is super fun, super like it's an easy read. It's a page turner. It's written by Hillman Sori and Corey Bray. It's written as a story, like as a narrative. So it's like super fun. You can like crush it in a day sitting on the beach or by the pool or what have you. And then Crushing Quota is a little bit more technical. It's written by Michelle Vazana and Jason Jordan, who also wrote Cracking the Sales Management Code, which many people have probably read before. This is all about sales coaching, whereas Cracking the Sales Management Code is more about like measurement, and then this is like kind of the application of measurement to sales coaching. So if folks would like a copy of these 2 books, we actually have hundreds and hundreds of them in a warehouse that we like to send out to our customers and our prospects. We'll go ahead and drop a link in the chat here for folks to go ahead and grab 2 copies of those, and we'd love to send those out. Wonderful. So let's go ahead and start talking about coaching. So the purpose of this presentation really is like, it's kind of a couple different steps. One is I would like to advance the claim. I would like to advance the claim to y'all that that managers should be coaching, and I want to and then assuming that you are convinced, we're going to talk about how to do that. And so kind of one of the things that should kind of help you understand why it's so important for managers to coach is because it really is the differentiator between middling sales organizations or underperforming sales organizations and outperforming sales organizations. And don't worry, you don't have to listen to me. You can listen to Gartner. They're obviously like way more important than me. And so these are a bunch of things that kind of come out of that. Like, and importantly, what's interesting is like, yeah, you can get higher productivity out of reps. So like use win rates, you can get people doing more customer facing meetings. Yes, you can have better retention of your reps or get more calories out of your reps, but they're all important things. The really big thing though, is that what coaching does is it raises people's performance and it like lifts those middle reps into top performers, right? So like the traditional kind of claim here is like you move you move your C players to B players, you move your B players to A players. And so this is kind of like the alchemy, if you will, of data-driven sales management. And the way that actually happens is you actually have to coach because you have to change behavior. And so Michelle does a really good job of kind of like putting numbers behind this in that Crushing Quota book. The interesting thing here is when talking about kind of like top 25% managers, they drive more revenue attainment, which is great, obviously, like 40% more revenue than the bottom 25%. But the important thing though is that they actually get more of their reps to quota. Like that's the key differentiator. It's not about taking your superstars and like making them super duper stars. It's about taking like the 6 reps on your team, the 8 reps on your team. It's about taking those like middle 3 or 4 and kind of pushing them up like an increment there. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that Michelle found in her research was that organizations who engaged in coaching drove more revenue. But you can't just tell your managers like, hey, you should coach, ta-da, and like problem solved. You actually have to put wood behind that arrow. And so one of the things that she found is that organizations that allocated budget to empower their managers, whether it's training or what have you, drove more revenue. So you can't just like tell your managers like, all right, time to coach, time to manage. You actually have to tell them, help them do that through tooling and training. And we find this, this is pretty common with us at Atrium. What we find with the managers that we work with and the sales leaders that we work with is that kind of like 2 things are kind of unsatisfactory with current state. One is that manager enablement is kind of an afterthought. If you think about where most managers come from, they're promoted AEs, they're promoted SDRs. They don't come from the world of data analysis, and they're not used to coaching or what have you. And so most kind of tooling is focused on empowering reps, and then moreover enablement resources go to those reps first. And so if you don't enable those managers, you're going to be disappointed. The second thing is that the resources that we give folks in order to do management end up being not purpose made for those for those managers. They tend to be what we call here at Atrium like the wall of charts here. And of course, like because these folks aren't necessarily trained to decipher those and what have you, it ends up kind of falling on deaf ears. Bridget, what are the things that you have kind of seen kind of the biggest shortfalls in some of the organizations empowerment of managers that you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think that one thing I've seen is lack of like trust in managers to
Mm-hmm.
handle potentially inconvenient truths. Not to
Oh,
quote
sure.
former Vice President Al Gore,
Right.
but I think it's like, hey, as a sales ops manager or as maybe second level sales leader, not trusting sales managers to access the data that they need to
Right.
really address, like find root causes of problems and address them.
Right.
And so what that might manifest in would be like, oh, we really want to make sure that like every report that they're looking at is kind of controlled by
Mm-hmm.
somebody else rather than empowering them
Right.
with skills even in like Salesforce to build out reports that
Right.
they could look at, let alone in Atrium. So that's kind of like a
Yeah.
more philosophical thing I've seen.
Yeah, totally. It's we yeah, it's like oftentimes that shows up. I think the mindset is changing. But it's kind of like a command and control mindset. That kind of like instead of about like devolving like devolution, right? Or kind of like democratization of access to this data, it's more like, oh, okay, it's almost like, okay, like you can't handle the truth. Here's this like lockdown dashboard right here that like you can't then we call it asking the next question, right? And
Right,
like, oh, okay, cool, like I see, oh, I see that our meeting volume is down. I should break that apart into the individual reps and maybe trend that out over 6 months, et cetera, et cetera.
right.
Oh, gee whiz, I gotta like Slack operations, or I gotta like file a Jira ticket or what have you in order to do that
Yeah.
because it's all locked down. Yep, I hear
Yep.
you. Cool. Yeah, and so if you think about the things that managers ought to be doing, like these are kind of the kind of managerial capabilities that we talk about with our managers. Like one, yeah, you should be doing deal inspection and kind of deal strategy. I mean, the reality there is that most AE managers don't really have to be convinced to do that because they just kind of do it naturally because they come from being account executives. But what they also need to be doing is tracking progress towards goals, right? And it can't just be like, output goals like bookings or opportunity creation in the case of SDRs, but it's got to be precursor goals as well. And it's got to be tracking those over time, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, what have you. They should be bringing data into their one-on-one. So one-on-one should not be about deal inspection. You should have deal inspection should be separate from kind of database coaching one-on-ones, which is where the work of that improvement, right, of that coaching improvement gets done. Like this is the one of the things we taught here on the Atrium go to market team is we call it, say, calendar is destiny. And so you need a place on the calendar for that data driven coaching to happen. And so the one-on-one is that. um, you need to be monitoring the ramp of new hires because the ramp of new hires is a particularly spicy point in time for, and then particularly important for paying attention to leading indicators. And then for the folks who are already ramped, you have to, humans are humans, right? You have to constantly be monitoring your team for potential issues and then jumping in to help kind of fix those. And then the flip side of that, right, the kind of yin that yang is taking what makes your top performers so successful and then spreading that across the rest of your team. And so like these are the things that managers should be doing. And the problem is because of the level of enablement and also kind of instrumentation that's available to them, most managers end up kind of like falling back on this, and it's just like deals, 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 deals all the time, which is low leverage, unfortunately. And so what our claim would be to the world is that you should use data and metrics to get leverage as a manager. And so these are kind of the reasons why it's important to get into management by metric and data-driven management and coaching in order to empower your managers. So one great example of this, like the traditional version of kind of like management and coaching, is riding along on calls. The problem, of course, is like it's good. The problem is like, are you on the right call? Are you on the right call with the right rep at the right point in the funnel, etc. Obviously, closing deals for your reps is astronomically low leverage. This is a common like undesirable anti-pattern with, especially with like recently promoted sales managers. Doing deal inspection, like recurring deal inspection, is important, because that like deal strategy is great, because you can say, hey, where are we at in this deal? Where's like what's next best action here? Where you potentially lost. But if you're just kind of like looking at the issues that show up on a deal by deal basis with a given rep, it's oftentimes very challenging to then extrapolate that into their overarching improvement areas. Those show up in metrics, right? Like, looking at these individual deals on a deal by deal basis is not going to necessarily, it's hard to intuit like, oh, based on all the deals we've looked at, this person has an average selling price problem, or this person has a win rate problem, or they have a conversion rate out of proposal problem, or they have a pipeline hygiene problem, or whatever. Those are things that would show up in metrics, and you would miss it. It's kind of like missing the forest for the trees if you're only looking at deal by deal. Remote remote staff makes all of this more challenging. And of course, call listening is all well and good, especially if you listen to it at like 1.5x on your your Chorus or your Gong iPhone app, which are actually, both of them are quite good. I have both of them on my phone. The problem again is that it's pretty low leverage there. And so what you want to be able to do is like listen to the calls that actually matter for the reps that need them. And so you're going to be directed there by using data. And so the important thing is that when you use data, what you can do is you can not only detect the issues that are at hand, you can then prescribe a get well path to those issues. And then lastly, you can track whether or not it's sticking. That's the important thing, is like the loop back there. And also you can see around corners here. Bridget, when you kind of think about the customers that you guys work with on the Atrium CX team, what do you think is kind of like the biggest issue that people realize once they start working with you guys, that like they've been kind of like doing poorly previously?
Yeah, I think there's like a number of things that Atrium empowers customers to do that they literally never could have done before. So I could
Right.
list a lot of those, but I think what they can do
Mhm.
better using Atrium that they already were doing before is like AE managers, for example. I think a big thing that is super clarifying is like pipeline hygiene or lack thereof. Generally, Atrium is going to help expose the lack thereof in some way or another, whether that's
Oh
like
yeah.
untouched ops, which is generally the issue, or stuck ops, like
Hmm.
things that just are not moving forward in the funnel and are sitting in a stage that should just go to close lost. And so I think
Yeah.
that like where new managers, especially, and some not so new, get tunnel vision is like getting bent around the axle of specific deals. But
Yeah.
because of that, they're missing the other vast majority of pipeline that
Yep.
can be messing up other metrics like deal cycle, right, or stage to stage conversion
Yeah.
metrics. And there's just kind of like a ripple effect of ignoring
Yep.
or just like not being exposed to pipeline hygiene and execution behaviors that are very, very important
Hmm.
for like all kinds of things, let alone, just closing deals more. So I think that's like
Yeah.
number one thing that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, that's usually a pretty quick win for not for every organization, but
Hmm.
I mean, at least for organizations that are not like enterprise. With the enterprise orgs, usually like the op counts that people are carrying is like, in the 10 or 20 range or whatever. But like in the mid market or kind of like SMB, more velocity folks, like when you have lots of ops, it's usually pretty like eye-opening to folks. They're like, oh my God, you're telling me that like 50% of your pipeline hasn't been touched in 30 days? Like, what? Why is that
Yeah.
forecast this quarter? Right.
Well,
But at
I
least
think
like
even
you have
like,
that shock and then things change.
yeah, I think even with enterprise though, it's like, wouldn't you want to have a next meeting on the calendar, even if it's a few months out? Or wouldn't you
Yeah.
want to have like, like, why not, right? Or like, wouldn't you want
Hmm.
to see that they are engaging them every few weeks or so?
Yeah.
And so like that can be like those little behaviors that go a long way, and kind of eventually become unspoken in an organization because they're so baked in. Even for
Yeah.
enterprise deal cycles, I think are super helpful.
Yeah. And I think what we're describing is kind of like this is like seeing
Hmm.
things that otherwise would have been hidden. Right. So I think the thing that I commonly see in enterprise situations is, yeah, these folks are responsible for 50% of their pipeline. Oh, okay, got it. So let's like go ahead and look at their prospecting behavior and their like opportunity creation behavior. Oh, there isn't any. or these
Yeah.
three are doing it and these three are not. Right. I think that's like a pretty common thing there. Cool. Thank you. And so one of the things that you can do when it comes to coaching is to kind of do this loop, this coaching loop that we kind of crib from this book called Boyd. It's about this gentleman named John Boyd, who was an air-to-air combat theorist, who coined this term, the OODA loop. So observe, orient, decide, and act. And so the idea here is what you need to do, whether you're a fighter pilot or a sales manager, is you observe what's going on, right? So you observe what's happening, and so the best way, of course, to do that is to do it with metrics and data, right, rather than on a deal by deal basis or what have you, or like sitting next to somebody, because all of those things are low leverage. So you observe what's going on, you then orient. So orient is essentially like making a judgment about like what's going on. You then decide for an action, like to create a prescription, and then you deploy that prescription. And then importantly, what you do is you then loop back, or you have to loop back and then observe again. So in this case, kind of like the Bridget example earlier about like pipeline hygiene, you observe what's happening on your team, and you say, oh shoot, this individual right here has way more untouched opportunities than their peers. That seems potentially problematic. Let's make sure that that's the case. Like, what's the issue here? Oh, like let's look at how many opportunities they own as compared to their peers. Oh, it's actually they have about 30% more ops than their peer. They're probably overloaded. Let's actually look at their activity. Oh, you know what? Actually, though, their opportunity touches are a little like 30% lower than everybody else's. That's weird. So like they're overloaded and they're lower activity. Okay, cool. Well, like let's figure out what we want to do as a prescription here. It sounds like probably what we're going to do is we're going to have the person close out a bunch of that kind of crap in there. And then it also seems like maybe what we need to do is like block some time on the calendar for them to actually be able to do that pipeline management. And so let's put some time blocks on the calendar, maybe like, 2 90-minute blocks per week, maybe on like Tuesday afternoon and maybe like Thursday morning, what have you. And then let's prescribe that. And then we're going to prescribe that. And all this gets done ideally in a one-on-one. And then we're going to loop back. And in a week or 2 weeks, we're going to say, hey, did those op counts go down? Is this person now in line with everybody else? Did their untouched op counts go down? Did their did their activity go up? If it did, yay, high five. We get to like move on to whatever the next issue is for them. If it didn't, it seems like our prescription didn't land. We have to drive. We have to continue to drive that solution. And so the way to kind of think about how OODA in sales management works is you go from a situation where you don't have any data or metrics, and it kind of feels more like this, where like you don't really see what's going on, so you're missing things, instead of actually coming to the party with a hypothesis. You're kind of asking questions and like asking about opinions. Oftentimes, and this is something that we see with junior managers quite a bit, it's hard to decide, so you kind of feel bad like making a decision, and so you end up not making a decision, you don't take any action. And so the idea with data and metrics that's far superior is that you can kind of see where something is weird, or ideally something like told you about it. You're able to dig into the data, like, not too much, but just enough to make a hypothesis. Ideally, you can land on what the root cause is, as we were kind of saying earlier, like, oh, too many ops, and also maybe not enough at activity, and then you can deploy a prescription there. And so what this looks like in practice here is like really doing it in the one-on-one, where you put together the one-on-one, and then you have relevant assets, and then of course you prepare for that with coaching, right? Kind of hypotheses, discuss those things, and then loop back, right? And so this is something, like I was mentioning earlier, I have a huge crush on 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach. This is something that they talk about there in their kind of coaching framework. So challenge, outline, action plan, consequences, and hold accountable. And so when you do that, great things happen. And so you go from kind of this realm of not coaching land to coaching, where it's way more actionable. So kind of some examples here would be like, not coaching would be, hey, when's the Lockheed deal coming in? Right? Like, not so helpful, versus, hey, what's top of mind for you on the Lockheed deal? I kind of noticed that we were only engaged with 3 contacts over there. For a deal this size, normally we'd be engaged with like 10 or so. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Right? So bringing data to the fore in order to catalyze a crucial conversation there. Hey, can you make this forecast bigger? Hey, I've noticed your forecast is pacing a little bit behind. Are there things that we can pull forward? Can we prepone some deals? Or maybe like we can't, maybe we're hosed and like we just need to, avoid this in the future there. Bridget, when you think about data-driven coaching, what are some of the like most impactful ways that people bring data to bear in the in their management of the SDRs that report to them, or the AEs that report to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that starting with like exposure of this stuff. So I'm going to go back to that kind of a more specific example of the pipeline hygiene stuff I was elaborating on earlier. I had a customer whose VP of sales actually had been kind of like, I don't know, apprehensive about using Atrium. It wasn't the purchase he'd made. He came in and it was a tool in their tech stack that other people like using, but it took him a little while to get into it. But when he did, what he really, really appreciated first about it was showing that, hey, you have a long-standing rep here who, he has a lot of tenure. And yeah, we've seen this pattern before. I'm sure a lot of other people on this call have. And he noticed, hey, this rep has like 100 plus ops open, and the average on the team is like 45. And
what?
yeah. And so it was like, first the VP needed to be exposed to that truth, right? And he was able to, we were able to ask the next question of like, okay, well, how often is he actually engaging these accounts? So we were able to split that by days untouched. And actually, lo and behold, surprisingly, he was really only capable of engaging roughly 40 to 50 of those ops on a regular
Turns out.
basis, which is, yeah, which was in line with the rest of the team. So this person
Yeah.
wasn't Superman, they couldn't do more than the rest of the team could, yet they were kind of like stuck on like, nah, I'm going to keep these open because I'm keeping an eye on them, right? And so what that manager needed to do, or what that VP needed to do, was, it wasn't that he, went and said, hey, rep, like, you're bad and this is bad. It was more like, we're going to socialize best practices with the team, and we are going to lead from the front and lead by example, and we're going to get that to be the standard on the team. And then it's not just, saying, hey, rep, I'm going to come down on you for having too many ops open. It's, hey, we're going to get you in band with the rest of the team. And you can see here, using data, we're not making this a subjective thing. This is an objective. You are out of band with the rest of the team, and I want to get you there. So what can we do to, like, lower that op count and make sure that you can really focus on the ops that you are best at focusing on, and then have a high chance of closing. So that's just like one example of, not necessarily just being like a robot and seeing like, I see, you are an anomaly on this graph, and I'm going to like immediately come to you. There is like an art of coming to that person, but it can be difficult. But next, what do you know? A couple of weeks later, I went back in to their Atrium instance and saw, wow, this rep all of a sudden is right in line with the rest of the team. And so
Yep.
that just is helpful for kind of like standardizing, like we saw in a previous slide, standardizing top performer behaviors across the team, and also kind of like asking those next questions and illustrating to
Yep.
somebody, hey, this is why you should be behaving like this rather than how you're behaving right now.
Yep. I love it. That's fantastic. Yeah. And I think like I love the idea of like not systematizing, but socializing best practices there and kind of helping people understand the why
Right.
behind it, and because that can drive a lot more buy-in. I think this is something. So our implementation team reports into Bridget as well, and so one of the things that organizations use Atrium for is like setting goals on leading indicators and also lagging indicators as well. And so one of the things that when setting goals, setting and managing with goals. That we talk about, and I actually do a master class on this around what is it, goals that don't suck. Is just like making sure that they're defensible, making sure that the people are like they're socialized appropriately so people can buy into them, and also just like not trying to like boil the ocean at once, but instead starting out with a more limited set of things to kind of get people attenuated to it and like used to it. Because I think that's like this is a new muscle for, it's not just a new muscle for managers, it's also a new muscle for reps as well, like being managed with data. It's the right way of doing it, right? But you don't necessarily want to throw people into the deep end immediately. So actually, perfect timing. Let's talk about how to systematize this. So a great way to systematize this data-driven coaching and management behavior is, first, you got to have time on the calendar to make sure that it's actually happening. So we want to systematize the observation, right, of that OODA loop. Great way to do this is your operating rhythm here. This is a sampling of like meetings. Like a pipeline review meeting is really great. It's make sure that our close dates are up to date, or our stages, our amounts, etc. Maybe a deal strategy meeting that we talk about like top 3 or 5 deals that we need to tackle and kind of like where they're stuck. These are different than that one-on-one that we were talking about. So this can be a very powerful place to talk about, data-driven kind of improvement areas and what have you, kind of loop back to the thing that we were already addressing. QBR is kind of a version of that on a quarterly basis. There's others as well, but the point is that getting these things on the calendar and then executing against them is the mechanism by which you're going to be able to make sure that these happen. And so this is essentially just like a very a high production value version of what an operating rhythm might look like here. So, on a monthly basis, so week 1, week 2, week 3 or 4, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And so you just have your operating rhythm kind of like spread across the week, spread across the month there. And in each of those meetings, you have the relevant content that you're tackling. So that's the systematization. So first, you got to make sure that the calendar time is on the calendar. Next, you got to make sure the assets are available. Oftentimes, can be where people struggle because like they only have like a couple assets, or they have what we like to call like a kitchen sink dashboard. It's like, it's the whole thing. It's the mega dashboard. You can't find anything. What is this for? I can't even remember. And so one way to kind of think about this is like, what are these reports and dashboards for? And so a helpful kind of rule of thumb that I remind people about is that a report, you should think about a report, right? Like whether it's a visualization or like a list of things, it should be answering a question, right? Like a discrete question, like how many ops have the SDRs created this month so far, per SDR? How many ops does each AE own right now? These are separate questions. How much pipeline is closing in the coming 90 days? But that's a forecasting question. How many emails did each SDR send last week? Not this week, last week, right? So these are different questions. And then a dashboard is typically composed of a set of these questions, a set of these reports that can be consumed at a given point in time. And so I think that's actually a really important thing here, is oftentimes people can end up with these like crazy, sprawling, all-seeing, all-dancing dashboards that are just impossible to use, because they don't think about it like saying, this is the dashboard that we use in this is the coaching dashboard I use in my one-on-one with Susie. Or this is the dashboard that we use in the SDR daily stand-up. Or this is the dashboard that we use in the sales team meeting to look at activities and outcomes from last week. So if you think about the point in time at which something is consumed, that will help you think about the content that should be in it, and then kind of the time frames associated with it. So that's reports and dashboards. And then moreover, one of the things you should think about is like having multiple views per metric, because usually a single view is not enough. And this is why it can kind of be a little bit of a pain if you're trying to be comprehensive, to kind of get sales operations or the data team to kind of help you with every view that you need. A good example of this would be, we were talking about pipeline hygiene earlier, or actually, excuse me, like say we're talking about, AE prospecting, right, or pipeline inflow. What we might want to look at there is, one, how many new opportunities have come into each rep's pipe in a trailing 90 days. And then, but if you don't have that trend, and like having a total is important and like maybe leaderboarded, but if you don't have that trended, it's going to be a while until you notice that somebody might be deteriorating. And so having that total next to a trend can really help you understand if something's changing over time. Of course, the different ways you can do this is you can do it in CRM reporting, you can do it in BI, both of which, you have to have the downside of you have to make everything that's in that. We're obviously fans of data-driven sales management software because it's very quick and people can self-serve, and then also it just automatically monitors as well. These are some kind of examples of what that looks like in practice. So like this is customer-facing meeting volume over time. This is totals right here. So like this is this month. Right? And if we wanted to see, hey, here's Nutsy the Vulture, and it looks like he's a little bit light here, but then we can look at the trend here, and we can say, hey, how long has that been the case? And actually, in this case, we can see that he was a little bit higher, but then it's like deteriorated here. So like that would give me concern. And so this is why it's helpful to have a total with a trend side by side. Similarly, having an eye on ramping behavior can be very, very powerful as well. So making sure that we're bird dogging pipeline ownership build or like things on calendar build as well. So those are kind of like ways of systematizing observation. On this topic, a little bit on kind of like what we do here at Atrium. What we believe is that managers ought to, because this is such an important topic, managers, SDR managers, AE managers, sales leaders, et cetera, they ought to have software that is purpose made for this specific use case. And so what that looks like in the form of Atrium is every KPI you could possibly want for your AEs, SDRs, AMs, CSMs, but then importantly, all those being monitored for you. So proactively tracking progress towards goals and kind of the outcomes associated with that on a weekly, monthly quarterly basis. Early warning alerting, kind of letting you know when somebody's off on a given metric as compared to their peers or as compared to themselves, like their historical trends. And then also doing kind of root cause analysis. So not just showing you a wall of charts, but hey, Bridget, this rep is off right here with respect to bookings, and the reason why is because it's his win rate. It's actually his opportunity counts are fine, his ASP, and it's his win rate looks problematic. And moreover, the reason why his win rate is light is because he's got a problem with conversion out of proposal, for instance. And so in short, Atrium helps sales managers, leaders, and reps use metrics to improve performance across all their behaviors. And we work with hundreds of organizations to kind of help with that. So let's talk about the next step here, orientation and decision. So the next thing that once you have these assets in place and the operating rhythm in place in order to observe these things, well, next you got to observe them, right? You got to actually read the data. And so the steps that we're going to do there is, one, we want to detect where something's going on. We want to diagnose what potentially might be driving that, and then communicate that kind of outcomes associated with that. And so examples of like kind of the cliffs notes on how to get good at reading data here is really just to like look at issues and bright spots in both those totals and trends. So remember we were talking about the totals and trends earlier. Well, if we have somebody who looks very low as compared to their peers, like in this case, meeting volume, low or high, right? So in this case, we've got a rep. He looks pretty low as compared to his peers, and we have another rep here, and he looks pretty high as compared to his peers. These would seem to indicate to us that there's something going on here that like probably needs to be addressed. And then on the trend side, what we want to look for is, is movements up and down, right? So in this case right here, we saw like, a deterioration over time of customer facing meeting volume here, and then a pop back up there. Whereas with this rep right here, we see a deterioration here, and then a persistence of that there. Bridget, when when your team is working with managers and kind of helping them get better at reading data. I mean, obviously, Atrium automates a lot of this, but what are the biggest kind of like initial kind of coaching things that you recommend to folks when they're consuming and trying to make sense of metrics to better coach and manage their reps?
Yeah, so I think that like having come from a CS, like an IC background, and
Mm-hmm.
jumping into the world of management, what I realized is that like a lot of managing people is similar to managing accounts, and there's like a lot of transferable behaviors in between those two things. And
Mm-hmm.
one kind of like, I don't know, soundbite I guess here is like, I think that being a really good IC as like an 8-year STEM means that um,
Mm-hmm.
you know that the best things happen in between meetings. Like what happens in between
All right.
face-to-face meetings really matters in order to move a deal down the funnel, or in order to like help a rep be, their best versions of themselves, and get, obviously
Mm-hmm.
business results. And so um, my point being that setting up
Mm-hmm.
Atrium to distribute metrics to you as a manager and to your team via Slack and email is really going
Yeah.
to help you drive home those things that you talk about face to face during meetings, whether team meetings
Right.
or one-on-ones. And so an example of that is that as I said in the comments or the chat, I think mini dashboards are awesome because
Oh
as
yeah.
manager, like I get pretty
Totally.
obsessed with like a couple of different metrics at a time. And maybe other people can relate, but like and they're generally leading indicators, and Atrium is amazing for that. So for example, activity points metric that kind of culminates all the activity, whether calls, emails, and meetings that my reps are doing. I have a daily activity points mini dashboard that distributes daily to our
Mm-hmm.
team Slack channel that just simply shows activity points yesterday.
Yep.
And noticed that over the course of 2 weeks, consistently, I saw one particular rep at the bottom of that list who is a very smart and hardworking person. And I was surprised to see that person. And I kind of,
Mm-hmm.
let it slide for a couple of weeks just to give them some space and not like jump on them instantly. But when I noticed that that was a consistent issue, I was able to bring that up with them during a one-on-one and say, hey,
Mm-hmm.
as you and I both know, based on this distribution, you've been consistently toward the bottom in terms of effort metrics. And that's surprising considering I know you to be really hardworking. So can you tell me what's
Yep.
happening here? And they were able to say, hey, you know what? There's a lot of stuff coming out of meetings that I'm having with customers that I'm just kind of
Mm-hmm.
paralyzed, and I'm developing a backlog after a few days of like kind of ignoring
Mm-hmm.
some things I need to do. And so then that way I was able to be like, you know what, been there, who hasn't as an IC been kind of paralyzed by the amount of work coming out of calls with follow up. And so we created a backlog together in Asana and kind of came back to it a few days later just to make sure it was all good. They went into the next week with like a clean slate. And
Yep.
then a couple weeks later, they're at the top of the daily distribution for activity points. So I was able to Slack that to them and say, dude, look at you. Like weeks later, you're
Woohoo.
at the top. And so I think whole point being like, coaching with data doesn't mean you can't coach with empathy too. And it doesn't
Yep.
mean it's all about data. It means it's like it might start and end with data, kind of like that
Yep.
observation and
Mm-hmm.
acting, and then coming
Mm-hmm.
back to observe and celebrate their
Mm-hmm.
success.
Mm-hmm.
But you should be using empathy. You should be using other tools in your tech stack to like act on that. It isn't
Mm-hmm.
all data.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't all just like bringing up a dashboard in a meeting. So that's kind of like how I'd recommend getting started slowly, like in little by little with metrics and kind of mini dashboards and distributions that are going to help you and your reps like observe, orient, act, decide, all that stuff.
I love it. Yeah. And I think, again, if people want to, like, 5 Secrets of a Sales Coach is a really great kind of primer on this. It kind of gives a lot of stories and examples of, again, as a narrative of how to kind of do that management. I think, Bridget, you really nailed it. It starts with and ends with data, right? But then the communication in the middle is not like, that's really important. And we talk about this a lot with like sales operations or data teams that we work with, who oftentimes are like maybe a little over rotated on the data piece, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is we're talking about managing humans, and humans are, they're delightful, but they're also messy, right? And so, the way that you need to coach them is different than how you would, you know, uh, manage a car who's like, where like the RPMs are too high or whatever, right? Like, you have to communicate with the human in a way that they is gonna, like, they're gonna be receptive to it, and they're not gonna shut down, and so on and so forth. But that doesn't mean that we're gonna forego doing that, because like the opportunity cost associated with that is no bueno. Wonderful. I really like that. It may end with data, but in the middle, there's a lot of opportunity for, for empathy and essentially the work of management, right? That's the middle,
Yeah.
is the work of
Yeah.
management.
I wish it could all
Excellent.
be data, but otherwise I'd be
Turns
out of a
out.
job, I guess.
Yeah, I know, exactly. It's just, well, I think that kind of goes to like what your job is as a manager. It's like, congratulations, like this is what you're supposed to be doing. If you're not having meetings with your reps and you're not like communicating with them, then like, what are you doing here? Like, why do you make the big bucks? Cool. The other thing that can be really helpful at reading data is just like statistical analysis, and this is actually something that's pretty unique to Atrium. Atrium monitors all these KPIs and can tell you when an individual is off compared to their peers, so it can like do the reading for you, if you will, or if someone's outperforming. The next step is when you're kind of diagnosing. You want to we actually have these laminates, desk reference cards for the AE revenue formula, and then the SDR pipeline formula here. So when you're trying to diagnose what's going on, if somebody had like all these metrics interrelate. So if you're trying to figure out what might be driving, a problem, what you can do is you can look at the upstream metrics there, and maybe we can drop into the chat the sign up here to get copies of these. I mean, they're digital here, as you can obviously see, but then also we make these really handy dandy laminate versions. I actually just gave 2 of them to somebody I had breakfast with this morning, because I keep them in my backpack at all times. You got to have your desk references. Cool. And so then the next thing is you have to systematize like the looping back behavior. And of course, the mechanism by which we do that is the illustrious one-on-one that we are kind of talking about earlier. This is a one-on-one template doc that we have here. I think maybe we can drop it in the chat if folks want to go ahead and get access to that template. But the idea here is like, what you want to be able to do is document the topics that maybe you're addressing, and then, because otherwise, like, kind of in one ear and out the other, if you're not coming back to it, you may end up kind of forgetting what it was that we were trying to tackle, and then we don't make progress. You can do the same thing with QBRs as well. So like, one-on-ones might be every 2 weeks, and a QBR of course would be every 12 weeks or so. Wonderful. So that's like the systematization of loop back. We're going to do a really quick example of like what data-driven sales coaching in action might look like. I think actually Bridget has given some really good customer stories here. Unsurprising, because our CX team works with so many customers who are using using data to improve the performance of their SDR teams and their AE teams and what have you. But these are just some examples that we've kind of seen actually in our own organization. I probably only have time to do one here, but so in this case, there was a rep. He was on track for a miss in a month, and it was really surprising, right? So he was going to miss from a booking standpoint for the month, and so when we went back and tried to figure out like gosh, what happened? Like, we're really surprised by this. Of course, like the first thing that we went to tackle here, like kind of went right, if you will. And one of the things that we looked at was his attempts, right? So how many ops were coming into his pipe. And so what you could kind of see here is that previously his opportunity inflow wasn't actually problematic. So it was super weird that he was kind of tracking poorly. We have like around a 60-day sales cycle or what have you. So it was kind of odd that his op inflow didn't look like there wasn't a dip in there. And then what was interesting though is that when we looked at the discrete stage advancement, so one of the things you can do in Atrium is you can visualize how many stages were reached card. You can also do it with like amount of pipeline that reaches a certain stage. What you can kind of see here, so again, our button is in green here. You can see that the number of, even though his op inflow count was right around 20 there, you can see that actually in April, burp, you had this little like dip in terms of how many ops actually got to disco and then later. And so that was kind of the root cause. So he had a bunch of ops that were coming into his pipe. He had a dip in getting them out to disco. And so the way that we address, in retrospect, there wasn't anything to be done about it, right? But the second best thing you can do is make sure it doesn't happen the next time. And so what we then did was we said, hey, let's not miss that in the future. Let's go ahead and put together some assets to make sure that we are not missing disco plus stages being reached. As we put together, as Bridget was referring to earlier, a little what we call a mini dashboard there. We'll also set a goal on it as well. So one of the things you can do in Atrium is you can set goals on these. You can set goals on these KPIs, and then you can, and then Atrium will track progress towards those or completion thereof. And so the idea here was that like we caught an issue, right? We in our little OODA loop situation, like there was an issue. We were kind of like, okay, what's going on here? Let's go ahead and dig into it a little bit. We oriented and kind of looked at a couple of different things. We realized what the potential issue was, and then we acted on it accordingly by setting a goal on that. And, I would love to say like and then we lived happily ever after, but the reality is that in sales management, you're always like there's always the next thing that you have to work on. But so even when you whack one mole, you then get to move on to the next one. But that's kind of how like we advance the performance of sales organizations in general, is by making sure that we're tackling these problems, resolving them, and then making sure that they don't show up again. And then we can move on to the next one there. Bridget, do you have any kind of like quick data-driven coaching story that you'd want to share with folks before we adjourn?
I think I just want to like highlight that, figuring out the root cause is helpful as a manager because you can see patterns going forward and be like, oh, seen that one before, gonna course correct like in real time rather than a few months later next time, because there will be next time. But it's also like so helpful for the rep to be like, oh, I get it now. And it's like up leveling both of you. And if that rep, is a potential manager one day at your company, then they've seen it, they've been there, they've done that already. They are learning
100%.
with you. And that's of
Yep.
course like kind of what startups are all about. So that is something just to highlight here, is like coaching with data up levels your understanding of emotion and also your rep, and kind of like building better, smarter reps who are going to be great managers one day.
That is an excellent point. And I think we're at the point in Atrium in our evolution as an organization, the go-to-market organization, we're like starting to see the benefits of that, where we have ICs who have then progressed into management, whether it's on the AE side of things or the SDR side of things, the CX side of things, who just like, their data-driven muscles, their data-driven coaching muscles are already like very well developed, if you will.
Yeah.
Which then of course like only makes your organization more performant. Wonderful. Well, we're out of time here, and conveniently we're done with our content. As noted, if folks would like a copy of Crushing Quota and 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach, couldn't recommend them highly enough. Go ahead and we're going to drop the link here in the chat for folks to go ahead and sign up for there. And then what I'm going to try to do here is figure out how to stop sharing my screen, even on one laptop monitor. Oh, and Angelica's here with the hook to pull us off the
I'm
stake.
back.
Hi.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. Thank you again, Pete and Bridget, for today's amazing session. Be sure to check out the awesome books. We dropped a free link here to grab your copy. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's session. Don't forget to check out our sponsor for today's event, Atrium. It takes less than 2 minutes to create an account. And I'll put the link here again to sign up. The recording and key takeaways will be made available on the MSP previous event page, and we'll see you at the next event. Thanks, everyone.